Okay, it's 4 o'clock. We're going to begin our study session this afternoon. We are waiting on Mayor Pro Tem to arrive, but we're going to go ahead and get going. And this one is on our 2026 budget. So I believe we're just turning it straight over to you, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So what we're talking about is the 2026 baseline operating budget. So right now we're strictly talking about operations at this time. So a couple things for the council members that are not part of the Budget Advisory Committee. You do have your binders, which kind of mirror what's with the Advisory Committee, and some information in there. All of that will be in the presentation. What we're kind of looking at today is we kind of want to go over the process of the budget, where we're at with the operating budget. We want to review some budget adjustments or some reductions. I know council has been kind of filled in on that, and Budget Advisory had a good discussion on that last week. And then we want to talk about also at the end our available fund balances. Next year we work into, or not next year, next month we work into initiatives, capital projects, and personnel requests, so that you know kind of where we're at going into that. So you have a couple of things in front of you, your binders, and then also we have a large document that kind of has the work that the management team and staff have been doing to get us to where we're at today to present to council. So just real quick, let's go to slide 3, Julie. This is the budget calendar. So again, today we're talking about the operating budget. The next steps are meeting with the advisory committee on September 9th to go over the initiatives, capital, and personnel requests, if any. And then September 18th, we'll have another work session to go over that with the full council as well. And then we'll continue through the process until we get to public hearings, which will start in November. So just to kind of set the stage for what a baseline budget is. It consists of, and this is on slide 4, thank you, Julie. A baseline budget consists of the current year's operating budget adjusted for inflation, contractual commitments, cost of living adjustments, and population projections. The baseline assumes the city maintains levels of service that matches what we're currently doing. So in Washington, we do an annual budget. There's 2 different types of budgets, an annual budget and a biannual budget, which is for 2 years. The annual budget that we do expires after December 31st of each year. So if council does not approve a budget by the end of the year, then we have no budget going into the following year. There's a couple of options as we go through the budgeting process, approve that particular budget, or set a budget, if we did have to continue work on it, set a budget that's equal to the prior year's budget so that we can continue operations as we kind of work through that. So what we really want to do is we want to talk about the assumptions, kind of fill you in on how the revenues and the expenses have been developed, and then we want to go through the work that we've done. What we want to do and what our statutory requirement is to have a balanced budget. That's where the revenues either equal the expenses and or the revenues exceed the expenses. We are able to use fund balance, which is our reserves, to fill in any gaps that there might be. Typically, you only use the reserves for one-time expenses and not for operating expenses. You're well aware that we've been using reserves. We built up a pretty significant reserve balance in the past so that we could do some specific projects to manage the growth of the city and prepare as we're working through the transition that we started in 2018, moving from a requirement, or not a requirement, but we were kind of using residential development to fund the city, and at that time we really worked with council and worked on a process to transition over to a dependence on commercial retail, because retail sales tax is the biggest funding source in the city and in the state of Washington. So let's go to slide number 5, please. So the main assumptions I'm going to go over here, this helps develop the revenue budget. So our official population as of April 1st of this year is 16,290. That's an increase of 3.2% from 2024 and 500 people. The reason why that's important is that's how we get paid out our state shared revenues from the state of Washington, because typically they're paid out on a per capita basis. So the estimated growth for next year, for 2026, is 4.65%. As you're well aware, again, we've been averaging over double digits for the last at least 5 to 10 years. I am expecting that we're going to go up a little bit more next year, about 758 people to just over 17,000 people. The reason for the increase, we do have a couple of multifamily places that are building right now with a potential for, I believe it's 194 additional units there. So we do expect those to build and also to be occupied. So with that, using the official estimate from the state of Washington, from the Office of Financial Management, we're expecting 352 new housing units. That includes those 194 multifamily. For a 2026 household unit of 6,631, that's an increase of about 5.61%. Why that's important is that helps us forecast additional sales tax that may come in for people that are purchasing things inside of Ridgefield, but also for looking at our water usage and what we will get for revenue in our water fund. And then also the new units help us estimate what we're going to get in our stormwater fund as well. 194 for multifamily is what we're expecting. Total, I believe it was 152 for single family residential, and then the rest of them multifamily. I'm expecting, oh, no. No, that's a few years ago. We definitely have some lots available, but I don't expect that they're going to be building at this point, so. Yeah. So the next assumptions that we're looking at is the inflationary factor. We use the West Region CPIU that's from June, which is released in July, and it's 2.7%. We use that to forecast what the increase in supplies and services will be for the city. We also use that for any COLAs they may have, depending on how it's written within each of the labor agreements. The labor agreements, though, do have a higher COLA as the minimum, so it's 3% on Teamsters and 5% on the RPOA. So the 2.7 really is factoring into the supplies and services, but also that's the index that we use for traffic and park impact fees and SDC increases that will happen January 1st as well. To compare that, the inflationary factor for school impact fees, which cannot be raised this coming year because we're at the max, is the Ryder-Levitt-Bucknell construction cost index, and that's 4.35%. And that one shows a pretty good reflection of what we're seeing in construction costs, if not even that going a little bit higher than that. So there are several slides in here that we're not going to go over. They're here for context for either the public to look at or for council to look at a little bit later. So I'm going to jump to slide 7. And this is just showing our facility expenses for facilities that we are leasing, both RAC, public safety, TMI building, or commonly called Bluffs, and then also Rourke. And Rourke, what that cost is our shared cost with the school district. I have reached out to them to try to get an estimate of what they're thinking is going to happen in 2026, and I have not received a response yet from them. But based on what our historical costs there and what we saw last year, I'm estimating around $65,000 for the shared maintenance expense. So on to slide 8. This is our debt service that we're paying for the limited tax general obligation bonds for the Rourke Public Works Operations Center and the Pioneer Widening Project we have currently going on. and then 2 equipment loans for a vacuum excavation truck and a street sweeper. This is just to show you kind of where we're at with what we're paying for some of the projects and equipment we purchased. And then we have a few new ones that will be coming up. One that I do expect will start to have debt service next year is the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund loan for design of the East Side Elevated Reservoir. And that's at 0% interest. All of these are relatively low interest. And then we have a few that will begin in the 27 through 28 period. That's some Public Works Trust Fund loans, both for downtown stormwater projects and Royal Road 19th and Hillhurst, and then a Drinking Water State Revolving Fund loan for the construction of the East Side Elevated Reservoir. Why I put those in, since we don't have debt service next year, is that is something we do have to keep in mind as we're looking at our budgets as we go forward. So to slide 9, this is again for our revenues. Our property tax, I do have it written into the budget pending council approval. Did you have a question? Oh, yeah, we're not, actually you can go through that. It's the assumptions tab.
Budget assumptions?
Yes, and then you'll want to turn the page a couple of pages, and or it's up on the screen as well. So I do have it written into the budget pending council approves that in November when we go to public hearings is a property tax statutory increase of 1%. 1% over our entire jurisdiction is just under 25,000 increase. So that's not a lot, but it is important as we keep going. As you saw earlier, our inflationary index is 2.7%, so we're always behind even with a 1% increase. New construction estimate of around $200 million. This one this year is a little bit harder to forecast because of a lot of our construction is also occurring, especially commercial, in the tax increment area. And with that, that actually goes into a different bucket that goes to pay the bonds for the Pioneer Street widening project. But I am forecasting in the general fund area about 123,000 increase. I will be getting information. I've already communicated with the county, and they should be providing some information middle of September. So when we have another revenue update, we'll be able to update you on that. And then annexations, again, we don't ask people to annex. It's as they come in. I always estimate really low on that because we have no idea. So I just put in $1,000 for property tax that will come over to the city once they annex, get through the process. So our total levy amount, I'm forecasting about 160,000 increase, which is just under 2.7 million in property tax, which is right about our second to third highest revenue source in general fund. So property tax for the tax increment area, this will go to help pay some of that debt service. A levy increase of about 109,000 for a total of about 250,000. Again, they weren't able to give me a lot of information on what they're seeing yet, but we will get that in September. This is one that I'm not sure how the county's going to handle that because they're really giving information to the original taxing jurisdiction and may not give me the totals of what that is for that area until we actually see the levy amount. So that's going to be a difficult one until we kind of see how it works. We're in the first year of that. So sales and use tax, again, are our highest revenue source. In 2024, we were 63% retail and 37% construction. This is the transition we've been talking about. In the past, we were about 65% construction and the rest of it regular retail sales. So we have turned that around. In the fourth quarter of 2024 and first quarter of this year, we've actually been slightly under 30% construction and slightly over 70% in ongoing retail sales. That was our goal. So we're getting to that goal. What we're not seeing right now is I forecast initially a 20% increase this year with the businesses. We haven't seen all the businesses we expected open yet, so we're down about 13 to 14% increase. So we are a little bit lower. We're still significantly higher than we were, but we're still lower than what was forecast initially for this year. What I'm forecasting is about a 7% increase for next year, because we do have quite a few businesses that are getting either opened yesterday or are getting very close. So that'll be about 5.7 million is the forecast.
So isn't it true, though, that we don't get tax on food?
On fast food and things like that, we do.
Reiterate the question, please.
So the question.
I was gonna, same thing into the microphone.
So the question is, do we get retail sales tax on food? If it's food at a grocery store that you're taking home to prepare, no, we don't. If you're buying food at a restaurant or already prepared food at a deli at a grocery store, we do get sales tax on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So now to utility tax. Again, this is roughly tied or a little bit ahead of our property tax for second, third highest revenue source. I'm forecasting about a 5.3% increase. This kind of ties into the increase in the households. It'll be about $117,250 for just under $2.5 million in revenue. We have seen, and this is good news with our water conservation, we have seen a reduction in what we would have expected this year if we didn't have the conservation in place for revenues, but the revenues are higher than the same point last year. So it's working in both ways. You know, as we grow, we're still getting additional revenue that helps pay the bills to offer those services, but we are seeing conservation in our water source as well, which was a big goal this year. So this is the fourth highest revenue source, and what it is indirect allocation. Indirect allocation is a mathematical model that we have had approved by the state auditor's office. We update that about every 6 or so years. And what that is that takes all of the general work that we do in finance, HR, admin, even council, our liability insurance, all that type of stuff. And we look at that on different cost drivers, and we allocate that out to every department. And to that, it goes out to some of the restricted funds, which are building and permitting, water, and stormwater. And with that, they pay into general fund for the amount of service that we provide to those departments in the administration areas, and then, you know, their share of the liability insurance and things like that. So it's going to be pretty significant increases this year. This is something we'll talk about as we go through the adjustments to the budget and the work that staff have done. In building and permitting, it's a 33% increase compared to 2025, and it does go up and down. It depends on the amount of work that we do. A lot of this has to do with, for building and permitting, part of this has to do with all the extra work that we've done with what's going on commercially. Some of it in the department, part of it for long-range planning is for the comp plan and things like that. But it's just about $725,000. And then the water fund is a 9% increase, about $619,000, and the stormwater fund a 24% increase, and that's just about $470,000. And part of that for those two departments is they got new employees. Stormwater specifically had a lot of new work that we supported them with so that they could do their job with that new permit requirements, and so they're paying into help with the general expenses that occur at the city as well. Then the state shared revenues, this is what we get on a per capita basis from the state of Washington. We're estimating, and this comes from MRSC, they have a tool that helps us estimate what the new per capita amount will be next year. And the estimate is a 3% increase due to the population increase. It's 4% overall of general and street fund revenues. I have seen a few of those line items going down, specifically the fuel tax that goes into helping with street operations. That's part of why general fund is transferring more over to streets, is because fuel tax is going down. Part of that's due to hybrid and EVs that are on the roads that are not paying a gas tax. But overall, it's about $651,000 in revenue from the state. So again, we've got quite a few graphs here. Again, this is for context for you to take a look at. What I do want to jump to is slide 15. And this is one that the council asked about a few meetings ago. And this is when we talk about our city property tax and the fact that the city is the lowest city in the county at 61 cents per thousand. The question was asked, how much are we overall when you get all the tax jurisdictions together? We're the second. Battleground is the second lowest. Battleground is the lowest. The reason for them being lower is that their school district levy is significantly lower than Ridgefield School District levy. Everything else is either the same and or a little bit less in Ridgefield. Battleground's $8.13. Ridgefield at second is $8.84. So I just wanted to bring that since that question had been asked. So slide 16, again, I'll just point out what I mentioned earlier, that we're down at 29.7% in construction-related sales tax versus just over 70% regular retail sales. That is definitely what we want to see. So let's jump to slide 19. And these are some additional revenue-related assumptions. Water rate, and this is something council approved a couple years ago when we did an update to our rate allocation models. The water rate continues to be at a 3% inflationary rate per that model, and just under 3.2 million in revenue. And then the stormwater rate model, again, a 10% increase. This feeds into the requirements that we have to manage that permit and the revenue needed for that. And the distinction also between water and stormwater is water also has an SDC charge, which helps with capital, where stormwater does not. And so stormwater rates have to pay the operations and maintenance, the capital, and any debt service that they have. Water, capital, and debt service, if the debt service is related to a project that increases, is increased because of the growth, it can be paid out of that SDC fund as well. So now to building permits. This also helps a little bit with revenue in general fund, but also specifically covering the services that we're offering in building and permitting. An estimate of 250 permits at the average size that we see in Ridgefield, about 1.5 million. I looked at this, our community development director kind of looked through all the lots that are available in Ridgefield, and we kind of looked over a 5-year period of what's realistic to build, and then also kind of factored in mortgage rates and, you know, the cost of homes and things like that to come with a conservative amount to see where we're at. Commercial permits, total commercial about 300,000 plus square feet. This does also include the square footage with multifamily because they're considered the same permit, but I broke them out for revenue purposes. About 150,000 in commercial for businesses, and then a multifamily 150,000 for those 194 units that we expect to build. And that's strictly for the building permits. That doesn't include traffic impact fees or things like that. Yeah.
This year?
We forecast
how many square feet?
300,000 as well. We've kind of looked at the land that's available, what's either in pre-planning, land use on, and kind of looked at what we're expecting.
Both are the same.
Yes. Yeah.
Real quick, these are estimates, right? So how often is our estimate how often does it stay close to what it actually is? You know, like you estimate now, a year from now, what are we looking at? Or where were we? Sorry, I'm all over the place.
That's okay.
Where are we now compared to where we estimated last year? Are we usually pretty on target here?
Yeah, let me ask a clarifying question on that.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the revenues as a whole, or are you talking specifically about building?
Well, I guess some of these assumptions, so like looking at building permits, especially like you're saying, hey, we are forecasting 250 permits next year, you know, and whatever we did last year, how close do we usually come to that?
In 2024, we estimated 300. We came in a little bit under 250. I believe it was around 226 or so. That's off the top of my head. So we were short last year.
Okay.
This year, we're trending right now to be in that 200 to 250 range right now. I know mortgage rates have just gone down, so that may help a little bit. We do have a couple of plats that have recently been approved, so that should start to improve a little bit. So we'll kind of see where that goes, but we're going to be relatively close there.
There's never really a huge disparity between the estimate and what we.
In 2020 and 2021, there was, because we were looking at 300 and we were over 600.
Right.
So, but that the market was a little bit different at that time.
What did the rate go down to?
Well, I had 1.75%. So, and a lot of people had just over 2. So we're not going to see that again. I mean, that.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. That was.
The building permits, the 250, are those single-family or single-family, multifamily?
Those are single family. Then I broke the multifamily for what we expect next year, 194, which is one entire apartment complex and half of one, and then there's more coming in 2027. So then when you look at planning and development, this is more along the lines of land use and engineering and things like that, about 1.5 million in revenue. And then the important one, cost recovery, anything that we are sending out to a third party for review, land use engineering, plan review, we're billing back on that because council approved cost recovery earlier this year. We're estimating about 285,000 both in expense and revenue. There will be a little bit, there are a few things that we won't do cost recovery on. That's specifically hearings examiner if it's an appeal. We don't feel that's something we should be burdening somebody who's appealing a decision. That should be covered through the department. And then overall about 3.5 million in revenue, which is an increase from this year on the forecast. So just go to slide 20, just a quick snapshot again. This is something council approved a long time ago, the transfer of the sewer collection system over to Clark Regional Wastewater District. We always show this one because this was important. Back then, the forecast was a 10% increase every single year in sewer rates if we would have maintained the sewer in our city. By transferring it over, we've been able to keep level payments. Back in 2014, it was $60.50. In 2026, it's expected to be $61.60. So very good decision that was made back then.
One of the things that we are starting to see is if you look at the, can you go back please? If you look at the system development charges, the SDC per ERU, that has increased. And if you look at, I mean, it's now for 2025, 10,819. It goes up again to 11,468 next year. That's the cost to connect to the system. And it's because of the $30 million investment that was made for the trunk line down to Salmon Creek. The issue we're seeing with that, though, is some of our small businesses that are trying to open in Ridgefield. That's a significant hit to them because that ERU is basically per seat. So you get a restaurant or something like that, they come in, they have a lot of ERUs, they're paying a lot for those system development charges. So it's something that we're already talking to the sewer district about is there a way to be able to structure this? Because we understand that everybody is paying their share of those hookups to the main line because we wouldn't be able to do this without it. But is there a way to break it down similar to what we've talked about with traffic impact fees and being able to take payments for those, somehow structuring that payment so it's not as big of a hit for some of the smaller businesses that we want to attract for our historic downtown for throughout our city. So that's something we're working on right now.
Just for my clarification, that SDC charge of next year $11,468, if I opened a 50-seat restaurant, would that be times 50?
I don't think it works that way. No, it's not directly like per seat. It's like a group. I don't remember their formula off the top of my head. I can get it for you. It is the larger the facility and the more seats, meaning the more seats that you would need in the facility. That does increase the ERUs, but I don't know their formula off the top of my head, and I don't know, maybe if anyone, Kirk, I don't know if you know it.
I don't have the exact formula, but depending on the size, it's structured where, you know, a certain size businesses always charge the same amount. So it is lower, you know, closer to this 11,468 for a smaller.
But it's by square foot. So because we went through that with a lot of businesses where the larger the business, like for example, when Sportsman's doubled their size, they did it by square foot and by seating capacity. So we did a lot of work with them to identify areas that are not seating capacity. And by minimizing the increase in seating capacity, we were able to work with Sportsman and a couple of other businesses to lower that SDC, just by kind of getting a better rationale for what they would be paying for. But
Is that, to that end, is that also based on what they're classified in within a building? So if it's like retail space along with something else? Because I've heard feedback just from residents about different fees and how that building's classified will alter that number.
so that's the case for traffic impact fees.
Gotcha.
For certain. The classification, the actual, the business classification does matter for that. For sewer, not as much, although there are, they do have categories. I'll get you all of the information on that. I'll follow up with that, and so that we have that. This is something that obviously that the sewer district manages because they do our sewer work and goes through their sewer district commission. However, obviously we are their customer and they've been a great partner in that and wanting to make sure that we are working with our businesses. So I can get that for you.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to ask too, so the numbers have obviously gone up. And I'm just wondering if that's going to continue, that number's going to continue to raise over the next X number of years.
They do this in 5-year increments typically, so they'll start working on that next year for 2027 on. And part of that is they're looking at what is their sewer capital facility plan going forward. And one thing we need to remember here is eventually the plant is going to be torn down. They're going to have to reverse all of the capacity out to the junction and then down to Salmon Creek. So all of those costs are going to be included in the calculation as well.
Thank you. And this, oh, sorry. On that note, and this might be another meeting, but I think it's important for us to figure out some kind of way to have this, as soon as someone applies for a license or something, a conversation is had, so they know that this kind of, they can anticipate maybe bigger fees that they're not knowing, so that they, if they don't opt into that pre-meeting that people can opt into, just having a really clear idea of how much this might impact a small business, I think is really important.
Great idea, and we do have some of that information, and we'll show it to you and see what we can do to bolster that. In the pre-meeting, everybody does a pre-application conference, and the pre-application conference, we do talk about some of those things. I don't know if that, or are you talking about kind of the pre-application that we do with some businesses, if you're referring to that piece of it, or pre-app?
I was referring, I know that there's a distinction between, like, someone can have a pre-meeting,
Yeah.
but I meant more like, I think even as soon as, like, if someone applies for a license or applies for something within the city, that triggers something within us that says, hey, here's a conversation, because we don't need you to get down the road and not know you're going to pay X amount of dollars for this, or how can we, if we put in a system in place in the future where someone can make payments or structure that, just getting a really clear idea as a business owner, I think will make that more enticing for businesses to open here.
Absolutely.
Councilor Wills, you had a question, right?
Yes, I had a question. Could you get us the figure back on what In-N-Out had to pay for SDC fees? I know they got a capacity of 73 people inside the building, and see how that correlates with what they had to charge.
Yeah, happy to get that for you.
One other question on this one. So these rates, the SDC rates, are set by Clark Regional or by us?
By Clark Regional.
And is that just pass-through money, like we charge it and then or is that billed directly by Clark
No,
Regional?
that's a separate permit with Clark Regional that they actually go to them, similar to how they apply here for our stuff. If it's sewer, fire, electrical, they go to a different agency and get their permits there.
Mayor Pro Tem.
So the person that opened the bicycle shop said to the group that was there something about a very large amount of money that it cost her more than she thought it was going to cost. So do some of these fees, well, they wouldn't have cost her now because this hasn't happened, but did anybody research how much it actually cost her to open that business? And
We did, and I actually provided that information to council. I actually showed that because the secondhand information that we were shown that it was a $40,000 hit was actually 12 or 13,000, and I handed that to you in briefings. I handed you those
yes,
materials.
you did. But did we relate that to her? I mean, what did she say about how did she?
Oh, did we go back to her and show her what she had paid? No, I wasn't asked to actually
I mean,
follow
I guess
up.
that's not really probably a politically correct thing to do, but I mean, I wonder where the other 27,000 came from.
TIs. It was
TIs,
TIs.
yeah.
So she paid a lot in tenant improvements that were not fees. They were tenant improvements that were
Okay.
above and beyond the budget for tenant improvements that they had established. So that's the above and beyond.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, I think we're free to move on.
Okay, so let's jump real quick to slide 21. Another graph I just want to show in through July of 25, we're at 564 total permits in building and permitting. So we're going to exceed, we've already exceeded 2023, we're going to exceed 2024, and we're approaching 2022. The 2 years we won't match, obviously, or 2020 and 2021, where we had significant business, but that just shows how busy and how much activity is still occurring in the city. So this, again, is part of that transition. So let's jump to slide 23. And now we're on to the expense assumptions for personnel. So we do allocate out multiple of our staff to different things, mainly public works, where they may work in parks and streets and facilities, water, storm, cemetery. So what we do is we do an analysis of where they worked for the last 18 months, specifically looking at the previous 6 months. And then once we do that, we meet with Public Works, we go over where were people actually signing out, and then how much labor time did it take for each of those specific areas to provide the service that we offer, you know, in a park or a street or something like that. And then we set our allocations out that way. That helps drive the budget as to where the labor costs are going to be paid for. So this year, it's estimated that the wage adjustments, the increase in personnel cost, and this is just looking at personnel in 25, and it's the exact same in 26. It's going to be a 5.7% increase. This includes any contractual COLAs, step increases, things like that. The one thing that is going down is our requirement for what we have to pay into PERS, which is the retirement that's managed by the state. It went down from over 9% down to, 5.58, which was a pretty significant decrease. So Washington is one of the only fully funded pension funds in the country. So that's really good news for us. We don't have a liability there. Healthcare costs, we don't typically get our new healthcare costs till near the end of the year, so it's usually so far into the budget process that we can't make an adjustment at that point. But we are estimating a 5% increase, which will mirror what we've seen the last couple of years. So the left contribution, which is the pension for police officers, is 5.32, same as the last couple of years. Wellness, about 47.5, and employee relations 30,400. That's things to help keep our staff engaged and healthy, and different events like the picnic and stuff like that. We do have 5 potential staff retirements. Don't know if they're going to happen, but we need to plan for those because per contractual agreement and or our policies, they do get paid out their accrued times. Depending on what the labor agreement may say or the policy. Those 5 retirements could be up to $207,000, so that is baked into the budget as well.
Is that a one-time payout or an ongoing?
It's a one-time.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't, after people retire, we don't have a liability for anything because they're going through their PERS or things like that. We don't have a pension plan from the city that's ongoing after retirement. So slide 24.
The only thing, Kurt,
Yeah.
excuse me, okay. The only thing is that they've got paid paid leave time or whatever that they've accumulated, we have to pay that.
That's correct. That's what this is.
Yeah,
Yeah. So on slide 24, this is our wages and benefits. This shows that 5.7% increase. Overall, our personnel expense of the entire operating budget at this point would be 56.6%. To compare to 2025 budget, it was 50.5 or 50.4%. So that's a pretty significant increase. So part of that, well, this is based on the budget part of it though too. So let's jump to slide 25, and this is, I'm just going to point this one out. This gives you kind of a comparison to what our personnel authorized FTE positions have been over the last few years, 23 through current, and we were at 76.25 FTE in 23, 82.25 2024, and 86.75 in 2025. Currently, it's the same right now for 2026. But there are some allocation differences between the departments depending on what we looked at with that payroll analysis we did earlier and mentioned. The next few slides just give you kind of some information of where the staffing is. The one that I'll point out is slide 28, and this is our employees per 1,000. Back in 2018, we were at 5.94 employees per 1,000. Going into 2026 with the population increase right now that we're forecasting, we'll be at 5.09. So we have tried to maintain at least at that 5.09, 5.808 through that 5.94. That's something we've consciously been trying to do, is maintain that. As you can see, it's been very steady really since 2020.
Back one slide. Do those numbers include the two people we hired to replace Mr. Green?
That, well, one is contractual, so the other one is an FTE, so that does include that, yes.
Yeah, there was no actual increase to FTEs for that, because one was a replacement for Mr. Green, and the other one was increasing a contract position that we already had.
Right.
Thank you.
Of course.
So let's jump to slide 29 and back to some expense assumptions. So our supply and service expense, we do a 3-year trend. This is something that as we kind of move things back to the directors and their staff to kind of look at the budget, as we'll talk about here in a minute, is they looked at the trend of what's been happening as they made some adjustments in their budget to look at what are we actually spending. And one thing I want to mention about this is council has helped the city by increasing the budget in supply and maintenance expense over the last several years, because we did have significant deferred maintenance in our fleet, our heavy equipment, and different things. And they increased the budget so we could catch up. We've been caught up on all of that. We still have some things to do in like the water system, which we're working through. But we got a lot of that, a lot of additional supply expense, and part of what we'll talk about here in a little bit, we did stock up also on our supplies that helps us with what we're going to talk about here in a little bit with some of the reductions. So that's an important thing, is that we're always looking at the trend and then comparing it to what our current budget is, and then any expectations of what's coming. If it's a big change to a service level or something, that would come through the initiative process. This is really looking at what does it cost next year to offer the same service that we're offering today. So our general fund transfer for street operations is increasing 14.2% to just over $1 million. We have decreased that in the work that we've done, but that is increasing. A big part of that is what I mentioned earlier, is that our fuel tax is going down because the per capita amount's going down, and we're just not seeing, as much tax. Even though they did increase the gas tax effective July 1st, we're still seeing what's forecast as a pretty significant drop per capita. The other things that are in there is our pavement and sidewalk preservation program. Council previously had approved $620,000 overall, $600,000 for pavement preservation, $20,000 for sidewalk. So that's in the baseline budget currently out of the Transportation Benefit District. And then our equipment replacement fund, couple things here. Typically, every operating fund that has equipment, whether it's fleet or heavy equipment, pays into this fund so that we can, per a model that we have, we look at useful life on a vehicle or a heavy equipment and when should we be replacing it so we can make sure we're putting money ahead before that time that the useful life is over. And we've been putting money in every year. In 2026, right now, it's being forecast and recommended that we reduce that completely in general fund, street fund, and storm fund due to some of the work we've been doing. We'll talk about that a little bit later, and I'd like some direction on that from council. Water fund, there's no reduction in that. The equipment replacement fund replacements for 2026 will come at the initiative phase. Right now, per the model, it'd be about $487,000. We are going to recommend that one piece of heavy equipment, we do what we did with the street sweeper and the vacuum excavation truck, is that we use a 5 or a 7 year loan to buy that down and pay over time versus paying for it all to help us out for next year's budget. We'll talk about that more in the initiative phase, but there will be some discussion on the transfer part of it this year here in just a little bit. So slide 30, this is kind of just a snapshot of each of the operating funds and then what the revenue is forecast right now for version 2 of the budget. We've gone through version 1 and version 2, and then I'm assuming going to be doing a version 3 after tonight. And then what our net is, which is our revenues above our expenses. And then kind of a comparison on the expense portion of it, of the increase in expenses, and then where our fund balance will be afterwards, and what's available. This is something, again, for you to kind of look at. You might want to set this aside, or we can come back to this here in a minute. Because actually, I think Councilor Favela is the only one who has the one in front of her. So what I want to do now is go on to the work that we've done. So let's go to the next slide, 31. Each of you have a copy of it in front of you in larger print. I need that so that I can read it. So I'm hoping all of you can as well. Where I want to start with is just kind of a general understanding of where we're at overall. If you look at the budget process that you've seen in the papers with the school districts, other agencies, everybody's been having some deficits and some budget struggles over the last couple of years. Specifically, the schools have been hit really hard. A lot of the cities around here, I believe Vancouver was 35 million negative. We're not immune to some of the issues that they're seeing. Part of that is the revenue. In Washington, the number one revenue source is retail sales and use tax. That counts on people spending money. When the economy either goes down or people perceive that it's going down, they pull back, they don't spend as much. That affects our revenue. We've seen that with house sales. That's one of the things we're not seeing as much one-time retail sales tax coming in. This year, what we saw was at the very first version of the operating budget, and I'm talking general fund only at this point, was we were seeing a deficit of just under $855,000. We've been in a very good place over the last few years because we are growing pretty significantly. We're working through that transition, so we did expect some of this to occur, and we are seeing the transition working. But it's slowing down a little bit because of factors we can't necessarily control. So what we're seeing is, a deficit at this point. So when we had our first management meeting to go over version 1 of the budget, what we asked all the directors to do for their budgets that they control is go back and go through an exercise of looking through your budget, comb through it very carefully, and cut 5% from each of your operating budgets. what our goal was, we had to get balanced, and at this point, what we were looking at was we just wanted our revenues and our expenses to balance, because statutorily, we can't go with a deficit like the federal government can. So what we asked them to do was do a 5% cut. Then I would go through and look and see what else I can get, because we had to get to just over 6% to balance out. The other factor that we wanted to think about was we're still not at the phase where we do initiatives, personnel, and capital, and we want to make sure we have a little bit of cushion, plus revenue projections could change. Some of the expenses could change. We have not been contacted by some of our contractual commitments, mainly through public safety, like we've received CRESA, but some of the other ones that we have to pay into the county for shared expenses that all the agencies do, we haven't received those yet. We've received our liability insurance, and we've received a few of that. And like I mentioned earlier, we won't get our medical health care costs until later this year. So we wanted to make sure we were okay there as well. So that's the exercise we asked everybody to do. They went through, they combed through, we got back together, and then we in finance, we also were still working through the indirect cost plan to make sure that we verified all the cost drivers and made sure we had an accurate, supportable model that when the auditors come in and look at it, they can say, yes, this is right, this is what you should have done. With that, we have a couple of revenue changes that add up to about $493,000. That's the 3 indirect costs from building, water, and stormwater. I already mentioned those. But also another one is real estate excise tax is allowed to pay for any type of facility expense related to new buildings or things like that. One of the costs, or a portion of the cost for the public safety lease that we have at TMI, is for tenant improvements. That's eligible for real estate excise tax. So we went through and looked, what is the amount that is still in that lease payment for, I believe it's 2 more years, that's related to tenant improvements, and that was $170,000. So we're going to transfer, or what we're asking is to transfer $170,000 from real estate excise tax to the general fund to cover that portion of the lease. Altogether, that comes to about $493,000 in revenue. Then we looked again through everything, and it's like we looked at the PD lease, and there is a change in the PD lease that comes up next year that saves us about $20,400. So we reduced that. Then we looked at 3 different things related to those 5 potential retirements. And those 5 potential retirements, that's a one-time cost. And thanks for mentioning that, Counselor, about that. Because it's a one-time cost, that shouldn't be included in the operating budget for ongoing. So we moved that over to one-time. Plus, Council approved a separation reserve a few years back where we put money down ahead because we knew we had a lot of retirements coming up. And we put money aside, so we'll use that reserve to pay the majority of these retirements. So again, that's moving it's still an expense we'll have, but it's coming out of a reserve. So then we got into the expenditure reductions. And this is where we really need a lot of conversation with all of council. We had a pretty good conversation at the Budget Advisory Committee about this. There were a couple of concerns specifically in the public safety area as to will this or will this not affect level of service. Our goals as we went into this, there are 2 main goals. First one was we don't touch personnel. Second one, we don't touch level of service. So that was our driving factor in looking through this. What I mentioned earlier about supplies and equipment is council had approved an increase in budget previously. What we're saying is we can reduce that budget back to where it would have been because we have gotten a lot of that maintenance caught up. We're in a good place there. We can still maintain. We have the ability, we do at least 1 budget amendment every year. If things improve, we can always come back and say, hey, we can do extra maintenance here, or we can buy extra supplies, and we can come back to council and ask, to change that. So we have the ability to adjust going forward. And again, this is a 1-year budget, so during the budget process next year, we'll review it again. But let's kind of go through, and I'm going to start with public safety. First one was first two I'll say are the two that were mentioned as the bigger concerns at the advisory, which is overtime, which was cutting our overtime in half dollar-wise, and then also the resulting taxes and benefits that are included with that, which is just about $115,000. So the concern with that is if we have to call people in to maintain our staffing level at night, do we have the ability still to call them in, or are we potentially causing us to not have the same shift levels at the same time? So are there any questions?
The overtime, is that driven by, say, a water main break or somebody drives over a traffic signal, or is it strictly people overworking their normal schedule?
Couple things. This one we're talking about is specifically public safety, but yes, to your comments for streets, parks, things like that, it would be more that, or events and things. For public safety, it's covering shifts, and Kathy can answer some specific questions on that. It's covering shifts, it's covering while people are away at training. The last few years, it's increased pretty significantly, but if you remember, we are also down in our staff pretty significantly. So I'll defer to Kathy to kind of fill in and give some information there.
Yes, so he's correct. We had at one time, I think we had 6 vacancies. So that created a significant need for us to have some extra overtime. So right now we have 1 vacancy. We have 2 people in the academy, but we have 1 legitimate vacancy. So hopefully we're going to save there and it won't cost as much in overtime.
Council, other questions on the
But the only question I have is in and out, increasing the overtime at this moment?
At this moment, it is a little bit because obviously we staffed up significantly for opening day. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what your needs are. Right. In and out is contracting. They have a traffic services group that work. Those are the brown shirt ones you see. And then they have state patrol, and they have a private contract with them.
Councilor Pavello.
Sorry. I don't have a question, but my concern with reducing overtime is that I feel like our goal is to protect our core services like police and utilities and debt obligations, and we need to focus on those low impact or the discretionary and non-essential spending before we go to looking at overtime. On page 25, we showed staffing doesn't increase for public safety over the next year or 2, but yet our population is increasing. Businesses are increasing. Call volume. You cannot predict a crisis or what things need to happen. And then you have these unintended consequences of maybe false savings by having that overcut without reducing workload for officers and new things coming in. So I think we need to take that into consideration as well.
It's an excellent point. One of the things that we will likely bring back to you is like Mr. Johnson indicated, we're just talking about baseline right now. We're not talking about initiatives. And what you mentioned is true, which it has been since 2023 that we actually increased the number of officers that we had. So it's been a couple of years since we've done that. So one of the things that we will likely do is pair these kind of 2 topics to look at if we were to bring on new personnel, would that help us continue to lower our usage of overtime? Because like Chief was saying, one of the things that we just saw is when we had a lot of vacancies, that's when we were just getting hammered with overtime needs because we needed to be able to keep that level of service high. So likely we will bring you those 2 issues in partnership with one another is how we see them. So, and I don't know if that helps if that would help the evaluation for you to look at that. Okay, perfect. We'll make sure.
Councilor Hamilton.
Thank you. Just to piggyback on that, I think we mentioned before, I think as someone that has led people in business, having things that make sure we keep staffing that are in charge of public safety happy and healthy, a really robust, happy and healthy department. And I think when we start to cut down services like that, that can be something that really spreads quickly throughout morale. So I think I'm about keeping these kind of things not as a first priority for us. I think we should keep the priority at keeping morale and the healthiest, most robust kind of core services that we can have.
Okay. Other questions on this, council? Comments? Okay, we can move on.
And one of the things, sorry, Mayor, one of the things that we are working on, we don't quite have for you yet, but again, as we kind of package up what we're doing to make sure that we are maximizing our public safety, public works, kind of those core services delivery, is looking at, and we get this asked all the time from council, is, well, what are other agencies doing? What is best practices for this? And that's something that we're looking at as well, is giving different staffing levels, what are best practices for usage of overtime? And it's something that we talk a lot about internally, is how are we being most efficient in providing that high level of service that we all get and expect from our PD.
Mr. Johnson, I know the purchase of the additional home on Pioneer did not necessarily come out of general fund, but if we flip that home and sell a portion of it, could that come back into general fund and help with some of these reductions in the budget?
No, by law, we would have to put that back into the real estate excise tax.
But one of the things that will, and that we've talked a little bit about, and we've given you some information, is the issue that the county council just moved forward with that. And that is the public safety sales tax that was just adopted by the county council, that was authorized by the state in this legislative session, along with the grant program. So that's something we've already talked about some. Again, we're only talking about baseline and not new revenues, so we want to be very careful about, let's start with a baseline that is in the positive for that, but there are other options that we can certainly talk with you about other revenues that we can reallocate.
I'm assuming that the $24K that we've cut from the Ridgefield School District is for the Resource Center.
Yeah, and we'll get to that one here in just a moment. So I've got a little bit of information on that one.
Okay, all right.
So I kind of wanted to focus on the public safety first and kind
Okay.
of go into those other things. So if we're ready to move, the next one was training and travel. I know this was a little bit concerning to the advisory committee, but what we're talking about here is more the traveling to longer distance training. One thing that Kathy and Rachel have been trying to do is bringing more training into Ridgefield where we're hosting it. Then we get our training for our officers free, and then the other agencies are really paying for that. So trying to leverage a little bit more of that, save that, and then save travel costs. We're not talking at all about anything that's certifications or requirements that they have to have. It's some additional, but this, I know the comment was made that this could be something, what about career advancement and things like that? We're talking about 1 year as well. And again, really working on trying to get more things here to do that and see if that can help. And it's, again, something we can come back to council at a later date too. Like Mr. Stewart mentioned, we're just trying to make sure we're in the positive now and then, talk about some other things later. But that was part of what we were thinking about with the reductions there.
Comments or questions on that, council? Okay. We can move on. I don't know that you made this super clear as far as like where we're into right now, which is this is reflective of the 5%
Correct.
Reduction that you asked staff to do, each department to provide, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and this is not by any means final. This is just kind of like the across the board, and then this is what we're going to look at.
Right.
Where we adjust.
This is what is in the version 2 of the budget, and we're trying to show our work to you and get direction as to whether or not we hit the mark or we did not hit the mark.
And specifically something that we asked as a management team, I asked our managers to look every department to look at how might we be able to do a 5% in your department without touching personnel or level of service, because our managers know best at the line level what are those things that might be able to be reduced, that weren't being used, that they can tighten on, that can create efficiency. So we really wanted to have those kind of bubble up to you. But again, these are just a starting point, and certainly it is the council's prerogative in how to move forward with it.
And the other thing, just a reminder of what I mentioned earlier, is we looked at the history of, what's been in each of these line items too, and if we weren't spending it before, is it really a reduction? If you had, and I'm just gonna use a number, let's say you had a $25,000 budget, but year after year, you're spending 10. There's 15,000 in capacity right there, so that's one of the things that they were looking at as well. So I'm going to package the rest of the public safety ones, with the exception of the SWAT share. That's the one outside agency charge that looks like we're going to be charged less, which was a shock to all of us. But the rest is supplies, equipment, uniforms, things like that. And that is because we stocked up on supplies, ammunition, things like that. And then, again, we're fully staffed, so the need for purchasing a bunch of uniforms for new hires isn't there. We have one left at this point. And if an initiative was put in to hire new officers, that would be part of that initiative as well. So those are things that we kind of looked at there is, where are we? Weapons, everybody has what they have to have. Supplies, we have supplies on hand. So it's looking again at what do we need for 2026 versus, what we normally have in the budget, so.
Mr. Johnson, with those items you were talking about with the example you gave, if we had, $25,000 allocated, but we're only using $10,000 a year, is there a way for you to put an asterisk by some of those, like we're just taking off what was never used, so that to us it doesn't look like we're taking away a full amount? Maybe it's year after year, this is not being used, so putting, having that stand out so we can see that this is an area that wasn't even being really used, so it's not like we're really taking away.
Yeah, I can do that. Now, the other thing, let me ask this question. So, and I'm going to use public safety for one, is we did increase supplies and tools budgets for the new employees being hired on, the new officers. So if we look at the amount that was added for that, that's kind of where I would look at for that. Would that work for you for the asterisks? Okay. So next things I want to mention, I talked about this a little bit earlier, is the equipment replacement fund transfer. So between the general fund and the street fund, that would be $230,500 that we would have normally, per the model, we would have transferred in. What this is going to require us to do is things that are expected to be replaced, moving things back 1 year. Most of the stuff for 2026, I believe we're going to be okay to replace. If council is okay with going with one large equipment item and doing that with debt. The rest of the stuff, I believe we can, but I have to look at the model a little bit closer. There is that potential one truck would have to move back that's shared through parks and streets. Everything else starting in 2027 would move back a minimum of 1 year. And then, of course, we'll relook at that next year to see where we're at and can we replenish that fund at that point. Part of this is we have money in there now to replace things, but the vehicles that we're waiting for on police, those patrol vehicles we ordered 2-3 years ago just came in this year, and they were much more expensive because of the time that was involved there. So it has drawn it down a little bit, but that is one way to get us where it's not really affecting a service level. And I talked to each one of the directors on things that would be replaced. Each of those items, for the most part, that would move back in 27 on for 1 year is in good mechanical shape and lower mileage. So it's not something that they feel would be a significant hardship to them. So the other main ones that I want to talk about is interns. So a couple of years ago, we were a little bit tighter. We were looking.
Are you going to hit on the city partners?
Yeah, I'll hit on that here in just a sec. That's a little bit smaller than. So the interns in finance, community development, and also HR admin 2 years ago, we gave up our interns so that we could use that money to hire some parks and streets employees because we needed people out in the field. And we didn't need the interns as much as we needed people out in the field. In 2026, each department had been told that they would get that money back to hire an intern, which is basically a half-year position. Since we haven't had them for the last 2 years, we feel that it's appropriate to extend that one more year so that we can get to the point where we're getting to, a positive in the operating budget here. In community development, since that really is building and permitting, the way that's helping is it allowed us to move some FTE from what was covered by general fund back over to building and permitting, so it didn't draw them too far negative. Whereas the other two, it was strictly general fund money. The other one that's with that is the park streets has, historically they had three seasonal employees. Again, 2 years ago, they gave up one of those so that they could get a full-time position in addition to the interns. And then Storm gave up an intern as well because of the budget situation in Storm. Again, they were supposed to get theirs back in 2026. Facilities or operations and maintenance has suggested that they keep their seasonals at 2 so that they can save that money in the parks and the streets. That helps us with getting to a positive. And then Storm really does need that position, so maintaining that there because of the workload that's coming up there. But that would be the 3 intern positions and 1 seasonal position that we would reduce for 1 year only, and then we relook at next year as we're going into 2027. So now to what we were talking about with the Resource Center. So a couple of years ago, council approved an increase to our partner funding, which are grants out to community partners. We've historically had a $6,000 budget where we do 5 $1,200 grants to different community partners. 2 years ago, the school district approached us about wanting to do a half-time position at the Resource Center, and could we assist with that? Council approved an additional $24,000 in 2023. We paid out a grant to them of $24,000. In 2025, we had not been contacted late in the year, so we reached out to the school district and say, hey, do you still need this? What's going on with the position? And they said, yeah, it'd be nice to get it, but we still have over half the money from 2023 left. So at that point, we still paid out the grant in last year for the $24,000. I reached out to the school district earlier this week and have not gotten a response back as to whether or not they still have funding available, which I'm assuming that they probably do based on the response I got last year, or do they need that to keep that position going? So we're trying to get that information from them, but the reason that was suggested is because last year they said they still had half of the $24,000 left, and at that point they didn't need it for finishing out that particular year. So.
And I have a meeting with Dr. Jenny next week, and I'll confirm that and talk it through with her just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
If I could, just a comment. That school resource center provides a remarkable service to some very, very, very needy people. Mm-hmm. So if it's possible that we can continue to fund that part-time person, it provides an incredible service to our community.
Yeah, and as soon as we hear back from the school district, we'll communicate that out to you.
But
So
the assumption there would be that if they have unused funds from the grant we've given them previously, and they do still have a need,
Right.
they can use those existing funds, those unused funds, correct?
yes,
And then so therefore, maybe we don't fund it this year because it saves us $24K,
correct.
right?
Yeah, and the grant agreement that we sign with them each time we give them that is the money can only be used for that part-time position for the resource center. So it is, it is restricted to
Good.
what the original purpose is. So the majority of the other things. I guess I'll highlight one, which is dear to council's heart, is the state of the city. We budgeted $25,000 this year. The video actually came to a charge of $52,000, so we increased the budget to $50,000 in version 1. As we saw that we were $855,000 in a deficit, we reduced that back to $25,000. So that was one of the recommendations on here as we were going through each of these different departments. So again, that's, for your discussion.
So questions, comments on that, council? Anybody?
Sure we could. I would think we could move forward in a different way on state of the city, not having to spend that exorbitant amount on the video. The video is nice, but I think there's other ways we can accomplish the same thing.
With that, I was just wondering what is the possibility? I would love to see us reaching out to the district. We have tons of high school students who do web design, they do videography, photography. They're working on senior projects, big projects. If we could partner with local students in the district who could benefit from actually helping us with the state of the city and having that broadcasted and getting their name out there as well.
Great idea. We can certainly look into that. Before we leave, can you go back to the past one? One of the things that we didn't talk about, that when Mr. Johnson said near and dear to your heart, I thought he was going to talk about something different, and that is the Roundabout Committee.
Yeah.
So the Roundabout Committee on this, if you notice, there is a reduction for elimination of professional services for the Roundabout Committee for 2026. As a reminder, each time the Roundabout Committee evaluates a roundabout design, there's money allocated for professional services for consultants to come in and do the design. They come up with the ideas, the committee does, and then a professional comes in and does the design on it. The reason that was being thought about to take those professional services out for next year is we don't have an identified roundabout for them to need professional services for next year. We haven't identified one. There isn't one that we see coming in the next year. That's why we had that being removed. It wasn't to say, let's just get rid of them. They were formed, and it's in their formulating bylaws, that they are an as-needed committee. So it would just be saying, all right, well, we just don't know what we would be designing next year, so we didn't need it. That's why that reduction is there. But I did want to make sure that we touch base with you about that, because obviously that's something council created, and I want you to be aware of.
Makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
So the other one I'll point out is the Watershed Alliance. You'll see a $20,000 reduction. That doesn't mean that we're eliminating the contract. It means that we're working with them to reevaluate how they're doing the work, and that we're going to work on water conservation and stormwater stewardship so that it'll move over to water and to storm. And the $50,000 contract that we have had with them for the last few years will continue. It'll just be paid differently. And with that, the majority of everything else are smaller charges. There is, again, some overtime for parks and streets and stuff like that, but each of those streets we didn't touch for overtime because we always seem to have at least one weather event. Lately, it's even moving into March and April. But parks, what they talked about is there's no need for somebody to be continuing mowing or things like that on overtime. They'll just go back the next day. And the only other real main overtime that we have, which we're not touching that part of it, we're reducing overtime for people who no longer receive overtime, is the events, and that's still available in the general fund. So the other things are mainly supplies and equipment and things like that that fit with what I mentioned earlier, where we either stocked up on that and we have a pretty good stock in hand, or we have gotten the tools that people need to do their job and do it efficiently. And that's the other thing that we talked about with this whole process is look at things and look at how, what can you do to be efficient and move some of this expense rather into a more efficient way that you do things. So you had a question?
On on overtime, is there any evidence that we have people consistently taking advantage of that? Or is there good control on overtime?
Well, the supervisors have to approve the overtime, so I think we have a good control. Where we're looking at is how can we do it a little bit more efficiently so we can reduce the overtime. Some of the overtime that we reduce, like in my department and Lee's department, is we have the employees that used to get overtime are now salary. They don't get overtime anymore, so it's a natural cut of the budget. So so that type of stuff has been removed. And that was part of it. But to your talk, when we're talking about the people who do get overtime, it's all approved. We're making sure that they're not doing it, but we're just talking about the efficiency part of it and the appropriate time to use overtime and to not use it.
And the bottom line of that is that every time we go through this process, we always start with efficiencies first. That is our overarching, overwhelming ethos, is to start with efficiencies. And so every time we have these conversations internally, we first say, how can we be more efficient in what we're doing and how we're doing it to maintain that level of service with the personnel that we have? And whether it's use of technology, whether it's how we tweak overtime, you looking at those ways that we can be the best stewards of the funds. And what you will see, and what Mr. Johnson will show you, is instead of just getting to level, all of a sudden now we're in the positive. And that's our job, is to say, all right, well, what can we do to get to that level? And in doing so, we have an amazing team that they don't just get to level, they go above that, they go beyond that. And that's what we have to present to you this evening, which is a testament to the people who are doing the work.
Two questions for you while we're on the topic of overtime. So if I'm looking at this, aside from law enforcement overtime, parks, long-range planning, finance, HR, it looks like there's roughly $20K in overtime expense reductions in those areas. Right. Is it a possibility that if council was wanting to preserve some of PD's overtime budget, could we pull from those and reallocate that to the PD overtime budget? Or are those different streams?
Well, it's paid from the same fund, so I don't know if it's necessarily we have to pull from that, or we just don't cut the public safety overtime as much.
Right.
Bottom line is, after all of this exercise and where we're at, we have a positive of $651,659.
Right. Oh, that's right, yeah.
So we do have that cushion that we are looking for. So if council says, and I'm not telling you what to say, I'm just going to throw, let's say you said cut in half the reduction that you did. So instead of 114,000, it's 70,000. Then let me know, and that's what we'll put into version 3.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds good. Second question is on the info technology. For this, looks like for consultant expenses for website updates, that's cutting $12,500 out of there. Is that the full budget we have for that, or is that just a partial reduction of that budget?
That's a partial reduction, and that will be one that would have an asterisk that we have not used that in the last few years.
Sure. Okay. Councilor Fabella.
Sorry. With the HR admin wellness relations tuition, I do see the eliminate the unused tuition reimbursement, which makes sense. But with the reduction in the wellness and the employee relations, is that going to be such a significant chunk out of what is already there that the staff would feel it? Because I feel like when we are good to our staff and we treat them well and they have these things that make them want to be here, they're going to stay. So how much would that impact?
So the tuition reimbursement is 10,000 of that. So the wellness and employee relations is 4,100. It's 5% of that total budget. So when I talked with Lee about that, it was, we'll just redo how we're doing things and rethink about that. We're not going to cut the program. We're not going to change the program. We're just going to look at a little bit way of rolling it out. So it'll still be there. The $10,000 in tuition reimbursement, I don't believe we've used tuition reimbursement or had anyone ask in over 5 years. So that's why this year it would be a good thing to use.
For the tuition, for the wellness, it's a great point, and Ms. Naniris is not here this evening, but we'll get more information on that, because it really is one of those things that is an incredibly low dollar amount investment for the benefit received. And you're 100% right that our employees really do appreciate the programs that we offer, and it does help us with retention. There's no question about that, and in recruiting. So we'll get more information about that and on kind of the ROI of those services.
Other questions or comments at this point before we move on? Okay, we can move forward.
So the question I have for you then is where we're at right now, as I come with a version 3 of the budget, is there any changes of this that you want me to make?
And again, this is a study session, so we're not looking for a vote on this because we can't actually take a vote. We're looking for just a kind of a general sense of it.
I think what I've already said is going back and having an asterisk so we can look at the things that we're reducing in some areas are funds that are just historically haven't been used or we don't really tap into those. I would like to see that so it doesn't look like we're taking away more or less, just not reallocating, historically unused funds.
But the notes tell you that, Katie. Most of the notes tell you that on the lines.
We can clarify too. We can do both.
So I guess my question is, how important is it for you to save the $651,000?
So it's good to have the cushion going into the initiatives process. So it's up to council to tell me where they feel, the direction that you can give me of where you feel comfortable going into that process, because there is every expectation that there will be something presented to council next month that would use some of that money.
So remember, this is the reductions that get us a net positive of 651K, but there still is, like what Mr. Johnson's saying, there still is the initiative process where we are going to pull from that to fund other things. And so there might be things in here where you don't want to do a drastic cut, like PD overtime, but the question is how much, and then if you do that, then it means that there's other things that we have less money available for to fund in the initiative area. So I guess having done this a couple of times, it feels like what we should do is just kind of say, hey, like bookmark what we want to reduce or not reduce in a general sense, and knowing that we're going to go into the initiative process and having that in the back of your mind because we're going to be discussing those things too. So.
That's your question though, Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, I mean, since we can't vote on this anyway, this is just a discussion about how we might handle it in the future. But so if we just leave this number as it is, and we go into the initiative process, we may decide that we want him to cut this in half, or we may decide that we need to use all of these funds for something else.
Possibly.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
maybe to help with this, so the next process obviously is initiatives that I mentioned. Then in October, we come back and we tie the two budgets together. At that point, you will see the operating and the capital initiatives all tied together, where we're at that point. By November 1st, we have to have something to roll out to the public. So we'll have a study session in October that ties it together, and that's the point where, maybe that's the appropriate time to do that. That's like
The schedule. It's like the second
probably
slide.
3.
There we go. Can you see Mr. Johnson?
Yes. So advisory committee, it'll be the 7th of October, and then council, it's the 16th. So that still gives us time to make a decision. Of course, that's a work session, so you can give direction, like Mr. Stewart mentioned, and then I can roll out a proposed budget to the public November 1st, and then we go to public hearings in November, and then that's when you begin the process of listening to the public for any comments they may have, and then the actual vote for adoption would happen the first meeting, typically in December.
I think I'm just coming back to the overtime thing for the PD. I'm just not sure it needs to be that high. I don't also know how comfortable I am with it being on the table at all, to be honest. So that's just where I'm at.
You're saying, just to clarify, you're saying as a reduction, this is proposing a 50% reduction in overtime. You're
Right.
saying maybe no reduction at all. Is that
Right,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My feedback would be about the overtime as well. I don't know that it needs to be, I think we can agree on a number that's maybe 70 versus 114 or whatever the percentage is that calculates out to. At least reducing that is my feedback as well.
If I may, just ask for both counselors who just indicated that. So there's a numeric reduction and a percentage reduction, but at the end of the day, what is it that what is the concern? It's not the dollar amount, right? So what is the concern? Because then we can get information to actually provide context to come to a dollar amount, whether it's 0 or 100 or somewhere in between, that helps you get to what you're seeking.
The concern is we have events that as a city, we have this unspoken expectation that our police department will be there. We have 4th of July. We have the holiday festivities. We have National Night Out. We have big openings like the opening that just happened yesterday. We need all hands on deck, and then you cannot predict emergencies. We don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to come in and say, we're just going to, reduce this and then put our department in some type of situation with the unknown. That's where that kind of uncomfortability is.
So it's that coverage on on some of those bigger, the days, the events, the unforeseen. Got it. Thank you.
Hang on, I want to go Councilor Hamilton, and then to answer City Manager's question, then we'll go to you, Councilor Burkle.
Thanks. I second those ideas in my original wanting to look at that too, but I think also just in the same way that we just highlighted that city staff is incentivized and people are recruited by their benefits, this feels like something that is almost like they're going above and beyond for the city, and then we're saying, no, you can't. Like, it feels a little bit yucky to take that away, to me, is my
Okay, and I will, and the only thing I would say to that is the OT that we're talking about here, there's mandatory and then there's non-mandatory. There's the OT that we have offered up, and we can get you numbers and percentages on both. On when we offer OT, the percentage of time that is offered for OT that's actually taken, that our officers take us up on, which is lower than you may think as far as a percentage on that. So, but we can get information on that as well. But that's a great kind of thing for us to be thinking through. Is like from an incentivization standpoint, how does this play? So
yeah, if they're not using it, I would love to see those numbers too, and just
yeah, you got it.
That totally changes things.
Okay, Councilor Burkle.
My only question on the OT is, I was under the impression that by having a complete staff or a full staff, that would eliminate some of this OT.
It very well may, and that's why I said in packaging that up with potential increases to staffing, or the fact that we are close to full staff, we can get you that. That's kind of why I was getting at what's the goal? What's the goal that we are seeking on this? Because then we can use the numbers to help paint the picture of how we are or are not meeting the goal. So that's why this is very helpful for us.
Do we know what typically drives the OT for the police department? Is it, as mentioned, the different events that we have? I realize there's always going to be...
There's a lot of different aspects to it. Some of it is staffing level. So, for example, someone goes on vacation and is gone for a period of time. You can only switch shifts for a certain number of days without it having to be overtime. And then that overtime has to be approved. So if somebody is gone for a longer period of time, it creates a gap. That creates a need for overtime in those circumstances. You have the events like In and Out where we offered overtime. It was not a mandatory overtime. It was something that was talked about. It was not a mandated overtime. So it was one that we put out to the officers for OT on that. Events, definitely 4th of July, those kinds of situations, you do get a fair amount of overtime. They bid shifts at certain times of the year, and that's it. So anything a lot of it is bargained. A lot of it is part of our contract that we've bargained. And again, we can get you more information. It's a good question. We can get that about the usage of overtime and what do we use that for. And we'll work on that internally to kind of better paint that picture of how we use it now.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just going to say as well, is I would like to see maybe a more complete analysis here, because it feels like we're working with partial information. And so to know, like, what have we utilized in the past and what maybe went unutilized, and then also the staffing levels, because we haven't had full staffing levels, and the assumption is we go into 2026 fully staffed. How does that impact things? So just kind of coming up with that analysis so we have a more complete picture to make that decision.
And then with the training and travel, I understand traveling, but if there's trainings that our officers or chief or lieutenant would love to do that is outside of mandatory, but it kind of benefits them in both like a personal interest, but it kind of rejuvenates them. I don't want to take that away from them either. Just as the wellness stuff for the staff, that kind of is seen as a wellness opportunity for them too. So if it maybe capturing it in a local, like if it's local, we're good, but you know what I mean? So
and that's where they were trying to get the efficiencies. The idea was to try to get efficiencies through how we do the trainings above and beyond what's already kind of the mandatory trainings. But we can definitely get you more information about that. And just because I'm a big fan of making sure there's equity within the organization and that we're not just talking about a single department, that we have OT reductions in other departments as well. We'll get more of the picture of that as well, of how are they being used and what this means and looks like. We'll get you a little bit more detail on that as well for the other departments where that's being suggested.
Yeah, again, I was just going to say something similar in that, like, if we're asking other departments to make those reductions in training or travel, you know, this is the one for PD is non-mandatory. So if we're asking other departments to make those reductions and make that sacrifice for 1 year, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask PD to do the same thing. Maybe it's not quite as much, but maybe you know, there should be equity across departments in those optional areas. Okay.
One point of clarification that kind of gets into the weeds, but may answer one of your questions, Counselor, is when you talk about the overtime, just because we have a certain dollar amount in the budget doesn't mean that you can't ever offer overtime again. The way our budget works is every department head has the ability, if they overspend in one area, they underspend in another. So let's say that the overtime was 100,000, they went up to 150, they just have to reduce in other areas. So it doesn't mean you can't do it. So that's one option that we have as every department head runs their own department and their own budget. So they do it as fit.
Yep.
So are we done okay on general fund for right now? I know we got some good information. The other parts of the reductions aren't as significant, but like Mr. Stewart mentioned, is we wanted everybody to go through the same exercise. So building and permitting, where it was, you know, obviously that cost allocation increase, and then the separation expense was moved over to one time, and then really the reduction was that intern position. They're still showing a deficit of 66,000. We're going to get to a slide here in a minute about our reserves and you know what the industry standard is. So I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that. We've known though for the building and permitting, we built up a significant reserve. We've worked through it the last couple of years. We did the fee study and then set up the cost recovery. We know we have to rebuild those. So we're already in a position of where we're at, but it's reduced significantly from where it was. So next one is the water fund. Again, we asked everybody to go through this. They looked at their overtime, felt that there were areas that they could reduce their overtime pretty significantly. And then supplies and maintenance, same thing. They got quite a bit of supplies that they purchased and they already have on the shelf, things like water meters and stuff like that. Part of the water meters, we reduced that because that really is related to how many homes or businesses come on. So we've seen that reduce over time. And then maintenance is reducing unused budgets. So that's one of the asterisk ones. And then there are some things that are maintenance related that will come back in the initiative phase that we'll be using the repair and replacement reserve, which is an appropriate reserve that we specifically set aside for that kind of stuff. Final one is a stormwater fund. The two things were the indirect cost allocation increase and separation expense moving over to one time. And then when we got into the reductions, it was overtime again, supplies and equipment maintenance, and then that equipment replacement fund transfer. Same reason, they were unused budgets for the most part. So we got some reductions. We still are going to see a deficit in that fund. A big part of that is because of the increase in the indirect cost. But we knew that this was going to happen. This is the fund that it started in 2005. Every single year we've been in the same boat. You know, we're working through this. We're going to use reserves for some of the repair and replacement stuff, but we'll also talk about the appropriate level of reserve versus what's in our policy too. So any questions on these particular ones? Okay, so let me see which one we want to jump to, Julie. So let's jump to slide 37. So as you know, we have policy reserves. Council first approved those back in 2014. They made some changes over time, the last one in 2022. What we wanted to do, though, was kind of go through what's the industry standard? Where do we compare to others? So I looked at both MRSC for what's recommended in Washington, and then the Government Finance Officers Association for what's recommended. Basically the same thing. So for general and street fund reserves, and we keep all of those reserves in the general fund, what our policy is two things for operations, and I'm only talking operations right now. It's 60 days worth of our previous year's operating expense and 10% of our revenue. That's ongoing type revenues. What the industry standard is basically 2 months of your upcoming operating budget for the expenditures, which is working out to about 16.7%. Our budget right now, and I know I mentioned yesterday it was just over 17, but I did a different calculation because there was some debt service in there that I took out because we have a separate reserve for that. Our operating reserve right now is about 19.2%. That takes out, we have a separate debt reserve in general fund. That's for those two heavy equipment loans that we have, and then also a capital reserve, which council has the ability to use that typically for revenue generating capital projects. With that, technically you would say based on industry standard, we're a little bit over reserve. Per policy, that's what it says we should have. But the potential is to get to that industry standard of 16.7%. We have an additional $250,000. Council could dip into those policy reserves that we have per our approved policy, but then we're staying at industry standard. So if you add in the debt service and the capital reserve, we're just over 30%. So we have used that fact that we're over 30% to our advantage when we're going out for credit ratings and things like that, when we're going out for debt issuance. That has really helped us out. We're a AA stable, which for our size city is extremely good. If you look at, I believe it was Beaverton that got rated the same time we did last year, we're the same rating as they are. You would expect that they should be a higher, bigger city, more revenues, but we're the same because of what our policies and the way that we manage our funds. So building and permitting and utility fund reserves, industry standard is 45 days. What our policy is for stormwater and building, it's 60 days of operating expense from the previous year. For water, it's 90 days. The reason why water is higher is it's not a stable revenue source. We get more revenue in the summer, we get less in the winter. So you try to have a higher reserve so that when you're getting less revenue, you still have the funds to make sure you're able to do your operations, pay the payroll, things like that. That's the reason why we've done that. The only city that responded back to me when I asked was Battleground. They do 60 days across the board for their utilities. So what that works out to is 12.3% of the operating budget. So for building and permitting, if we were fully reserved, we would be at 14.1%. We have dipped into that, as you well know. And overall, we would be at 14.2 if you included the capital. Again, we've dipped into that. Water fund, we're at 15.5 for operations, which would be about 116,000 that we could use for other things. We do have excess reserves in water. We will be using those excess reserves on some projects coming up over the next year or two. And then we're almost 50% if you include the separation and the capital repair and replacement. We'll be asking council to use some of that capital repair and replacement this coming year. I think Ryan's listening to me, and he's got a lot of things in the hopper that he wants to do. So stormwater fund, we're at 12.2%. If we were fully reserved, we have dipped into that slightly. And overall, with the separation and the capital repair and replacement, we'd be at 47.4. Again, we'll ask to use some of that capital repair and replacement. So that's kind of where we're at on our reserves compared to industry standards.
The reason we raise this with you is because when we say these are our reserves, they're actually your reserves. These are policy reserves. They're set by council. They're not set by us. They're not set by staff. They're set by you. And there is always a push and a pull with this. On one side of it, you want to make sure you have the stability of the organization at hand for the purposes of bonding, for the purposes of continuity of service. If there was any sort of dip, there are good reasons for having strong reserves. On the other side of it is the continued pressure from your constituents and the population of the city to provide services and provide them at the level of service that they expect. So to keep at that same level of service, it costs money. So the question is, what is that right balance of providing the service and the stability of the organization? That's where those policy reserves come in. And as we get into initiatives, that's going to be part of the conversation, is the more initiatives that you think are necessary to maintain the level of service people expect, that means the more money being spent and the possibility of dipping into reserves. How do we do that in a way that is fiscally prudent, but is also not just socking away money in the bank that your constituents look at and say, well, that's my money, and I want you to spend it on my pothole instead of just sticking it in the bank and making interest off of it. So that's the kind of the balance that we're trying to reach and why we give you this information.
The last time that we reviewed and made changes to the policy reserves was back in 2022. Since then, we have not, and what that change was to move the stormwater from 90 days of operating down to 60 days. So again, council can do that at any time, but as Mr. Stewart was mentioning, that's something that may come up during the initiative process. So any comments or questions about that?
I look at the way things have been done in the past and where we are today, and I would be very, very concerned about making any significant changes. I think what we've done works, and it's proven. We're financially solid. I think our level of service is admirable, and like to say, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Anybody else?
No, I like everything I see here on the paper, but before we close, I've got some comments that I'd like to make that sat in a meeting this morning and I share with the group. But let's finish this first.
12 minutes, Kirk. We have questions, so what else do we need?
So I think we've got what we want to go back and start to look at version 3 before we come back. Kind of what I heard, so let me just kind of bring that. What I heard is we kind of keep things, but we do some research for you. And then we come back with the initiatives, and then after that, we'll kind of discuss as we get into October, and we tie the two together. Am I correct in what I heard?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So the only thing that I have remaining is to jump probably to the last pages and just remind you of the next steps. Well, actually, let me just point out a couple things that are in here. If you go to, if you want to look at it online, or you do have it in your books, is look at the capital project fund revenues and then the special revenue funds. Look at that. That's going to show you what I'm forecasting that you're going to have available when we get to looking at capital projects. Transportation benefit district, affordable housing, tax increment area, what we can use from there to offset some of the debt service, and then the impact fee funds and real estate excise tax. Impact fee funds, again, just a reminder, we have a lot of credits out there. They are using the credits. They paid a little bit more in cash than I thought they would this year for transportation impact fees. We do have a very large grant request in that the match is going to be a little over $2 million. So keep that in mind. That'll be a project that will come up to you. That's, you know, a little bit for you to go back and look at just to see what you're going to have available. Again, we'll have it, you know, with the initiative so that you see that, but it's just something to kind of prepare yourselves. And then from there, just a reminder of where we go from here. September, budget advisory, September 9th at 4. Actually, we moved that to, I believe, 3:45 because there's a competing meeting that starts at 6 at TMI, so we need to be out 15 minutes early. And then personnel initiatives, capital project requests, and then council work session will be on the 18th at 4 again. So that's anything that you may have questions ahead of time, send to me or feed through Mr. Stewart, and then we'll make sure we're prepared for that. And then October, we'll tie everything together, get a final revenue forecast, and then get Mr. Stewart's budget message and the preliminary budget, and then we'll prepare ourselves for public hearings. So that's everything I had, unless you have more questions.
Great. So council, remaining questions or comments at this point. Do you want to go last, Mr. Wells, or would you, yeah? No. Oh, okay, good, yeah, okay.
I was just curious, since I haven't been through this process before, how often do people come into public hearing and give feedback? What does that generally look like?
Well, we have not had a lot of public comment in the past. I wish we would have a little bit more, but no, we haven't had a very large, we have people come to the budget meetings, but they don't typically speak.
No, not at those meetings. And we have the budget book, we have the online dashboard, we have the metrics and that we've put on there. We have a lot that we've tried to put out online, and then we do social media pushes every once in a while to remind people that it's out there. It's infrequent.
Other questions or comments, council? Mr. Wells?
No, it's not doom and gloom, but we need to turn around and watch what's happening before now and in October, November. This morning, I sat in on a meeting between two contractors, large contractors, and just gleaned from them. They said right now on the bidding part for jobs go, small jobs, and I'm saying small jobs, 500,000 and under, they're having anywhere from 12 to 18 contractors bidding. Anything over 500,000, a lot of them have trouble getting bonding, so they don't complete. But the bigger ones are running in 8 and 9 contractors to turn around and bidding on it. One of the individuals is just busier and all they can get at right now, can't keep up. After the first of the year, he's got nothing in the pot. Jobs pending, where normally he's got half the year filled up already for next year. So this year he has nothing, and it's bad for their employees, for employee retention, because yes, they're eligible for unemployment, but a lot of them can't survive on unemployment because they're used to the prevailing wages and that. So what I'm just mentioning it, at some of the comments that are going out among the contractors world. And so we have to be cognizant of that and watch before we make our final budget come in October, November. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other thoughts or comments before we wrap up? Looks like we are good to go. Okay, then we can give everybody 6 minutes back, and we will conclude the study session. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and to your team. We appreciate the thorough work as always. Yeah.